If you really want to get past the daily headlines of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you have to understand its basic architecture. I mean, what are the fundamental ideas that keep this thing so locked in place? Let's break it down.
So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to break this whole incredibly complex situation down into 4 core pillars. Think of them like the foundation holding up the entire conflict. If you can really get your head around these 4 ideas, everything else starts to make a lot more sense.
And here they are: land, power, demographics, and security. Simple words, right? But each one is its own battleground, its own unique lens through which both sides see their reality. We're going to walk through them one by one to build a much clearer picture. First up, let's talk about the most obvious, the most tangible pillar: land. At the end of the day, this is a conflict over who controls a very specific piece of territory. It's a fight over the literal ground beneath everyone's feet. And you can really see that clash right here on this slide. On the left, you've got the Palestinian claims. They're rooted in the idea of sovereignty over the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as their capital. But then look at the right. You see the reality of Israeli administrative control, which uses ongoing settlement expansion to create what are often called facts on the ground. These aren't just disagreements. They are 2 completely opposing visions for the exact same piece of land.
Okay, so let's move to our second pillar, which builds directly on that idea of land: power. To really get a handle on the dynamics here, you absolutely have to understand just how unequal the distribution of authority and control is. It's a profoundly asymmetric reality.
And this chart just lays that asymmetry bare. On one side, you've got these fragmented Palestinian governing bodies. The Palestinian Authority in parts of the West Bank and Hamas controlling the Gaza Strip. But on the other side, you have the unified Israeli state, which maintains total security control, manages the borders, and decides who and what gets to move through permits and closures. This power imbalance isn't just a small detail. It shapes every single interaction.
All right, pillar number 3, demographics. And listen, this is way more than just numbers on a page. We're talking about a critical strategic factor that drives long-term planning, politics, and the very idea of national identity for both sides.
So why are these numbers so critical? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. The number of people in a given area and who those people are directly impacts who can lay claim to that territory and what the political character of any future state might look like. It's a battle for the future, told through population stats.
This visualization really breaks down those demographic pressures. You've got a Jewish majority inside Israel itself, and then these concentrated Palestinian populations in the West Bank and Gaza. Now look closely at that slice for Gaza. The extreme population density, the high growth rates, and this huge youth bulge, all of that creates immense humanitarian pressure and instability, which in turn directly fuels political and military strategy.
And that brings us to our 4th and final pillar, security. And this is where you see some of the absolute starkest differences in the capabilities and the methods each side uses to project force and establish control.
So first, let's look at Israel's security setup. It's exactly what you'd expect from a modern state: a unified military, air, land, and sea, super sophisticated intelligence agencies, and advanced defenses like the Iron Dome. But it also includes this whole administrative layer of control, things like checkpoints, permits, and military orders. It all adds up to a multi-layered system of control, both on its borders and within the territories.
And the contrast, well, it could not be sharper. On the Palestinian side, the security formations are fragmented, and they operate completely differently. You've got the PA's limited security forces, Hamas's military wing in Gaza, and various other armed militias. Because they don't have a conventional army, they have to rely on asymmetric tactics, like rockets, tunnel networks, and urban resistance, to fight back against the technologically superior military.
So we've got our 4 pillars: land, power, demographics, and security. Now let's put it all together. Let's look at how they interlock to create this self-sustaining conflict, and what that tells us about where this is all going.
This right here shows you how their core goals are just fundamentally opposed. Israel's objectives are mainly about security: degrade the capacity of militants, preserve what they call strategic depth, which is basically a buffer zone, and crucially, prevent a contiguous Palestinian state from forming. On the other side, Palestinian goals are mainly political. The Palestinian Authority is chasing statehood through diplomacy, while Hamas is focused on maintaining its credibility as a resistance force. They are, for all intents and purposes, playing 2 completely different games with clashing endgames.
So, what keeps this whole cycle going? Well, the sources point to these 4 key drivers. It all starts with these deep, existential fears on both sides. That gets amplified by domestic politics, where taking a hard line often gets you rewarded. Then you throw in shifting international alliances, and finally, you get to that last step, the settlement policy, which is actively changing the map and making a two-state solution harder and harder to even imagine.
And we can never forget the human cost of all this. During major flare-ups, especially in a place like Gaza, the humanitarian consequences are just catastrophic. This mass suffering isn't just a tragedy, it actually becomes a strategic factor in itself, drawing in international courts and diplomatic pressure that then goes on to shape the next phase of the conflict.
So if these core issues don't change, where does this all lead? Well, the analysis doesn't really point toward a neat resolution. Instead, it points to a pretty grim set of possibilities, a state of perpetual, low-level conflict that's punctuated by these huge, large-scale wars. We can probably expect more fragmentation of territory, more international involvement, and that ever-present danger of the conflict spilling over into the entire region.
There's a quote from the source material that really just nails it. It says that settlement expansion and the administrative control systems that support it are the main tools being used to create outcomes on the ground that might be totally impossible to reverse.
And that leaves us with this final, crucial question. As more and more of these irreversible facts get created on the ground, is the long-held goal of a viable, contiguous Palestinian state even possible anymore? That is the central dilemma facing everyone involved. And the answer, whatever it ends up being, is going to define the future of this conflict.
Subscribe now for more conflict breakdowns.